I've had the privilege of being here on Wednesday nights about 4 times now, and it's always been a great delight. But I also realize that I'm not known by most of you. But let me say this. I may not be known, but this church is known about throughout this nation. But what you're known for are the right things. You're known as a place that people can come and they can find Jesus. You're known as a place that people can come and they can find help. You're known as a place that people can come and they can experience love. And you're known as a place that people can come to and they can grow and they can worship. But all of those things that you're known for, none of those things would happen without great leadership. And the perspective that I have is a little bit different because the greatest churches in this nation, the people that you probably watch on TV, are dear friends of mine. And I get to be a part of their lives and they're a part of mine. But what I want to say to you is, as a pastor who's done this for 40 years, Mike and Barb are 2 of the most amazing pastors that I know. And so in this day when people don't stick it out, I want you to know how proud I am of you for sticking it out. In this day when people so easily discard their faith, I want to say thank you to you for being people of faith. And in this day when people so easily forget what's important, I want to say thank you for always remembering what's important. And you are great, great pastors. And I'm so proud of you. And Jenny and I consider it an honor to call you friends. So thank you for what you've done. That being said, I did let you sit down, but if you would stand, we're going to pray and we're going to get into the Word of God. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this great church. I thank you for these great pastors that oversee this church. I thank you for the great team. I thank you for the worship that is just an amazing entry point into the throne room of God. I thank you, Father, for all the great things that happen throughout this church. I thank you for the kids that are being changed, the youth that are being changed, the college kids that are being changed. I thank you for the adults, young and old, that are being changed. Thank you, Father, that you have truly fulfilled in this church, Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20, that they are experiencing exceedingly abundantly above all that we could possibly ask or think. This congregation is an amazing congregation. But Lord, what I also know is that none of us have arrived. None of us get to say that we're there. Every day you want us to take another step in our relationship with you, to know you better, to walk closer with you, to experience you in new ways. And so this evening, it's the end of a day. People have gone to school. People have worked hard. This is the end of this day. But Father, it's not the end of our relationship with you, because this evening we come humbly into your presence and we ask that you would help us to grow, that through the words that you speak, through the Spirit that you have sent, that Father, you would take those 2, the Word of God and the Spirit of God, and you would create revelation this evening, and you would help us to see further, to see better, to begin to widen our perspective. And Father, when it's all said and done, this is our prayer, that you would help each of us to be more like Jesus than ever before. That is our prayer in the mighty and precious name of Jesus. And we all agree together saying, amen. Well, you can be seated. I want to take a few moments and I want to talk to you about your faith. I don't want to talk to you about Billy Graham's faith. I don't want to talk to you about Joyce Meyer's faith. I don't want to talk to you about Michael Caminetti's faith. I want to talk to you about your faith. I want to talk to you about the kind of faith that you possess. In Matthew chapter 17, Jesus said these words, I say to you that if you have faith as a mustard seed, you might say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing shall be impossible to you. See, so often when faith is ever communicated, we start thinking about the faith of other people. We think about the faith of a Mother Teresa who went over to Calcutta and all she had was literally a dime, but she began to raise up a ministry that began to touch the poor and began to minister to the most marginalized people in this world. Or we think about a Billy Graham who was just a young preacher in North Carolina, but somehow God raised him up to do mighty things. Or we think about a Joel Osteen and we see him on TV and we look and we're amazed. And so often when people come to this church or my church and we mention the word faith, they think about someone's faith other than theirs. They think about someone, they say, well, that person has faith. That's a great faith person. That's a person who really, really has faith. But in their life, they sort of just settle back and they say, I'm not sure that's me. I'm not sure. But this evening, I don't want to talk about the faith of someone famous. I want to talk about your faith. I want to talk about the faith of the single mom. You know, that hero of mine, that single mom who has a couple of kids. She works 2 jobs. She works 6 days a week, and the only day off that she has is Sunday. But on Sunday morning, when everyone else is considering all their options, are we gonna do this or that? That single mom makes one decision: I'm gonna get my kids in church. Because that single mom knows that the only help that she has is God. Nobody to blame for her kids. She's there all alone in the corner. She's there with those kids. She's there when she's too tired to stay awake, but she's mom, and she knows that she's got to get her kids in church. And she'll sit through a sermon like mine or Pastor Mike's, and she'll be dead tired. But you know what's in her heart? I've got to have something happen in the life of my kids because every odd is against us. But if you were to look at that single mom and you were to ask her, do you think that you have amazing faith? That single mom will sit there and say, you know what? I'm just trying to get my kids to church because I know we have no chance without God. I'm talking about the faith of the individual that walked into the doctor's office this week. And the doctor looked and said, yeah, the tests are back. And when they said that the tests were back, the doctor sort of paused for a minute and shook his head and said, the test didn't come back how we wanted. And I gotta tell you right now that you've got cancer. And that person who's hearing those words at that particular time, that cancer's been declared in a test, they're sitting there and they're feeling everything at that moment. And at that moment, they don't feel like they have amazing faith. But I'm talking about their faith. And I'm talking about the faith of that man who was never raised in church. He doesn't get it. He doesn't get, the words that we put up there. He doesn't get the fact that we're putting vapor in the air. He doesn't get any of that. He was never raised in church, but he's an alcoholic. And he knows that he's lost his marriage. He knows that he's lost his kids. He knows that he's lost his job. He knows that he's lost all his friends, but he stumbles into a church like this and he walks in and he says, I can't do it. I can't make it. I've got to have God. But you know what? He can't find any book in the Bible. He wasn't raised with this. This is all mysterious to him. He doesn't know how to pull out a Bible. He doesn't know how to find Matthew. He doesn't know how to find Matthew 17 and Matthew verse 20. He doesn't know how to. So I'm not talking about Joel Osteen's faith. I'm not talking about Joyce Meyer's faith. I'm not talking about Kenneth Copeland's faith. I'm not talking about anyone's faith that we would hold up as a giant. I'm talking about your faith. I'm talking about the faith of the person who goes through life every day and they walk into a church like this and they see the perfection of it, but in the midst of that perfection, they're thinking, I don't think this is me. I don't have hours to open the Bible. I don't have hours to spend in prayer. I don't have hours. And you know what happens so often? They feel like when we talk about faith that we're talking here, but they're way down here, but I'm talking about your faith. So let me ask a question. If you're gonna write a book that has 66 chapters in it, 66 different books that you're going to consolidate. You know that this is going to be the most read book in the history of mankind. That any book that has ever been written will pale in comparison to the number of people that has this thing. These 66 books put together in a thing called the Bible. And you knew that in Canton, Ohio, that there were going to be people 2,000 years later reading that book. Why would you put certain things in it? See, my mind just is a little bit contrarian. I always wonder, God, why did you put this in it? You could have edited this book to any form, to any fashion, to any level, and yet you put this in it. So why, when you were describing faith, did you create a metaphor? Why did you use a metaphor of saying, if you have faith as the grain of a mustard seed? Why in the world is anyone in Canton, Ohio? Why do you need to know that? Why did that pass the editing and make it down this far? Why do you need to know that 2,000 years of all the metaphor? Now, I don't know about you. I do this for a living. I've done this for 40 years. Yeah, look at me. I look amazingly young, but it's been 40 years. But you know what? I've done this for 40 years. I've never run across in 40 years a mustard seed. Now, maybe you've got a mustard seed bush or tree or whatever in your backyard. But you know, in Texas, I've never walked into anyone's house and said, hey, look at my mustard seed tree. Look at my mustard seeds over here. I've never seen it. I spent my whole ministry, my whole life, and I've never seen. You know, when I saw a mustard seed was one day I was looking at this verse and I thought, I'm a pastor, I'm a preacher. Maybe somebody will ask me, what is a mustard seed? So you know what I did? I went to Google. And I Googled it. And when I Googled it, it showed me this little seed. And I thought, wow, why didn't we say watermelon seeds, cantaloupe seeds, apple seeds, a mustard seed? Why did he use that metaphor? Why did he decide that 2,000 years later on a Wednesday night, someone like you needs to know that? Why? Now, can I be honest with you? I've never seen a mustard seed tree until I Googled it. And really, it's not much of a tree. It's pretty little ugly. It's in between a tree and a bush. Texas, everything's big. We'd call it a bush. But I mean, you know, it's really not that impressive. So why? Because God knew that there would be single moms. And God knew that there would be alcoholics that come to church. And God knew that there would be people that have just walked into a doctor's office and they've been diagnosed. He used that metaphor intentionally. And the reason he used it is something that you've been well taught, is if you ever really do take a mustard seed and you look at it, it doesn't really look big at all. It's not as big as a cantaloupe seed. It's not as big as an apple seed. It's not as big as a watermelon seed. It's really, really amazingly small. So the first thing that Jesus was trying to communicate is for most people, when they walk by faith, most people feel like the problems they have are bigger than the faith they possess. Now, that's if you get beyond the church people, you know, who just sort of know the buzzwords and the code and everything. But if you talk to the average person out there, you know what? They sit there and say, I don't feel like I have much faith. I don't feel like my faith's that big. I don't feel like my faith's that great. And what he was saying is that it's all right to be a person of faith and to feel like your problems are one size and your faith is another side. Because if he didn't say that, there would be people who would say, I can never be a person of faith because I don't have big faith, I don't have great faith, I don't have large faith. But can I tell you, I've never met anybody who just was told by a doctor that the test came back in 40 years of pastoring, and they immediately felt like their faith was so giant, so big, that it just didn't matter. I've had them call me and say, Pastor, I've just been told something, and I'm not sure that I've got the faith for this. But what Jesus was saying is, if you want to be a person of faith, the first thing that you've got to realize is, usually you will feel like the problem you're facing is bigger than your faith. Now, let me say it slowly. You will usually feel like that the problem that you're facing is bigger than your faith. And so you'll feel like, well, I'm unemployed, that's bigger than my faith. My marriage is in turmoil, that's bigger than my faith. And he was saying that it's all right that if you have that instinct of saying, hey, you know what, my faith feels small, but my problems feel big, because what did he compare it to? He says, you got this little bitty, small seed, and you got this big mountain out here, and if you look at it proportionately, the mountain looks bigger than your faith. And he says, it's all right. It's all right. It's all right when you get outside church and you're dealing with real life if you feel. Now, the second reason that he said that is this, is because it only takes small faith to handle big problems. See, we have the idea that it takes big faith to handle big problems. And so we got people trying to muscle up their faith. You ever seen someone in church muscle up their faith? And so we got all these people trying to muscle up their faith. It's like going to a gym. You can tell I don't hang out there much. But for those people who do, Pastor Caminetti, he obviously goes there. And at those gyms, if they're highfalutin kind of gyms, sorry, that's sort of Texas there, but if they're those upper class kind of gyms and everything, they have mirrors. And they have you have those mirrors because they want you to see how big your muscles are. And they want you to think, man, these muscles are really growing. But Jesus was saying, when it comes to faith, you need to understand there are times when you'll feel like your problem is bigger than your faith. But he said, it's all right because small faith handles big problems. So I don't have to look like Mike to succeed. I don't have to have big biceps. You ever seen those guys, they want to pose and everything? When I go like that, it's not posing, it's usually cramping. But you're sitting there and you're seeing these guys because they think they got to. And I've had people in my church that think that if they don't have big muscular faith, they can't do anything. But here's what Jesus was saying. It is not the size of your faith, it is the size of your God. And everyone's been staring in the mirror at their muscles of faith, and God said, lift up your eyes from where your help comes from and look at me, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of your faith. Don't be staring at you, stare at him. But I got people that I can't get them to walk in faith because they think that they got to have this big muscular faith. This faith has got to have the ripples on it, and it's got to be there, and it's got to be highly defined. God is saying to you tonight that it's not the size of your faith, it is the size of your God. And let me take it a step further. It's not the perfection of your faith, it's the perfection of your God. See, Jesus didn't say, if you have faith the size of a mountain. He said, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed. What he was trying to do was to get you out of proportion comparison. He was trying to get you beyond sitting there saying, well, my problem's this big, but my faith's this big. And since my problem's this big, I got to get my faith. So I'm going to start coming on Wednesday nights because, if you come on Wednesday nights, that's worth double. And so I'm going to get big faith because I'm going to start coming to the service no one really has to come to, but I'm going to come to that because I'm going to make my faith bigger. And I've watched people miss God because they were so focused on the size of their faith, they couldn't see the greatness of their God. And so in your life and my life, Jesus was saying something. He was saying, hey, problems sometimes seem big. I've had them sit there, Pastor, my marriage is so messed up. I don't know what to do. I'm praying, but I just feel like my prayers aren't anything. They feel so small in comparison. And I look at him, I said, that's the reason Jesus said, if you have faith as the size of a mustard seed. But the third thing Jesus was saying was this. Faith doesn't have to stay small, it can grow. And what he was saying is, hey, you plant a seed, it'll do what it's supposed to do, and it'll grow up. And so there were three simple thoughts. He was just saying, hey, your problem at times can seem a lot bigger than your faith. Don't let that discourage you. He was saying small faith does big things because it's not the size of your faith, it's the size of your God. And he was saying, hey, you need to understand something. That little seed of faith, it can get into your heart and it can start growing bigger and bigger. I want to take you back nearly 35 years ago in my life. Jenny and I, my wife and I, had just started our church in Plano, Texas. We were just young kids starting a church. Didn't know if anyone was going to come, but we started it. Through the grace of God, a few people showed up and it grew and it grew and it grew. But at that time, we're just kids. But at that moment, Jenny was pregnant. Now I have 3 kids. My daughter, Wendy, my oldest daughter, she's adopted. My son, Cody, who's sitting right there, he's adopted. He's my youngest. But at this time, Jenny's pregnant. And Casey, my second daughter, is about to show up. Now, this is the first time. Now, we've already had the kid thing because we adopted Wendy when she was really 4 weeks old. So we had gone through the baby stage. We had gone through all of that. We knew the parenting thing. But this was the first time that my wife was carrying a child. And so we did all the things. I mean, we're pastors. We did all the right things. We weren't doing anything weird. We weren't doing anything extreme. We're praying over this baby and we're believing God over this baby. We're speaking all the right things, that this baby is alive with the health of God and that every tissue, cell, fiber, and organ of this baby's body functions to perfection that God ordained it, that this baby's gonna grow up and live to declare the glories of the God. All the things that you would think that a young Christian couple would pray after they conceive, we're praying. Now, we just started the church, but we get towards where it's almost time for Jenny to deliver. And as Jenny's, during that period of time, we go to visit a friend, and Jenny looks at me and she says, Gerald, I think I need to go see the doctor. Well, hey, I pastored long enough. You never argue with a pregnant lady. There's just no upside in that, no matter what. So I said, sweetheart, you want to go see the doctor? I'm totally fine with that. We'll just go. I said, is everything all right? She said, I just feel a little bit unusual. And I said, okay. So we go and we take her to the doctor. And, you know, we already have a kid, so this isn't new mom, but this is new pregnancy. And the nurse knew that, and he said, sweetheart, it's not unusual for you to feel things. Come in here. And they start running the tests to hear the baby's heart. Well, at that point, the nurse just works for a minute. She got this big smile, but you could tell that it wasn't working the way, and she didn't want to let on anything. She just said, hey, I may just step out and get the doctor. And so a lot of people get upset, you know, nowadays when they're in a doctor's office and when they go there and all of a sudden the nurse says, you know, something, well, I'm taking care of this. But can I tell you something? As long as you're not seeing the doctor, you're probably doing well. But all of a sudden the doctor comes in and he starts fiddling around a little bit. And he says, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, we've got to take your wife to the hospital. And I said, well, what's going on? And he says, we can't find the baby's heartbeat. So we got to go to the hospital, and the baby's going to be born today, but we're just going to go over there. We're going to put a fetal monitor inside her where we can get a better listen. We went over there. It's just right across the street. They put the fetal monitor in. Everything, you know, they can hear the heartbeat. There's a man in my church who's been with me for all the years that I've been in ministry. He had come up because I had called him. And once we're hearing the heartbeat, I said, sweetheart, Ray and I are going to go out and we're going to pray for about 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, I come up to the floor and I look and there's no one. There's no nurse on the floor. There's no doctor on the floor. I go into the room, there's no wife in there, there's nothing. All of a sudden, I see doctors running from everywhere. And it's the first time I learned that when a doctor's walking slow, that's good news. You never want to see a doctor running. And so they're running everywhere, and they said, that's the father, have him sit down. They literally put me in a wheelchair. Said, you just sit there. The baby's heart's crashed. We got to get the baby out. We got to get the baby out quickly. So I'm sitting right there. There's a wall here, and on the other side is where they're doing the surgery. So I'm hearing everything. I'm hearing the doctors being concerned, talking to each other, and they're sitting there doing an emergency C-section. This is not that little bitty C-section. This is the one that goes all the way through. I mean, they are getting that baby out quick. All of a sudden, I hear Casey cry. I think, baby's all right. She's crying. Hear the doctor say, go tell the dad he has a healthy baby girl, I think. Now, you got to understand, I'm a dad. I look for leverage. I've always told Jenny that I was the first one to have to stay up with the baby since she slept through the first time that the baby cried. And so I've always told her that. So I've got Wendy at home. We get Jenny in a room. Everything's fine. Doctor says everything's fine. Take a few days to overcome this and everything. And at that particular point, I said, well, I've got to go take care of Wendy. I go take care of Wendy. We, you know, are at home. And all of a sudden I get a call and Jenny says, you got to get back up to the hospital. I said, is everything all right? My wife's crying. So I run up to the hospital. I get someone to take Wendy, and I run up to the hospital, and at which point the doctor walks in and says, there's a problem with Casey. Says she has a serious heart problem, and you're gonna need to get her to a pediatric cardiologist, and you're gonna need to get her there as soon as we release you. And even though this is an emergency C-section, we're going to release you tomorrow morning so that you can get, this is serious. So all of a sudden we went from there being a problem to everything's fine, and now there's a big problem. Now, I don't know about you. I don't have pediatric cardiologists that I can speed dial. So I start calling around. I said, I want a good one. So I found a Jewish one. And so I go and I find a Jewish one. And I can remember to this day, we show up and I walk in holding Casey. And he takes her out of my arms. And he literally takes his stethoscope and he listens to her heart. He didn't listen to her heart for 20 seconds. He put his stethoscope down, handed Casey to me, and he said, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, your baby has a serious problem. Well, I'm a problem solver. Tell me I've got a problem, I'll be shocked for a second, but let's get on, let's find the answer. And so we're sitting there, and I said, okay, what's going on? What are we gonna do? He said, the nature of this problem, this is 35 years ago. He said, the nature of this problem is we're gonna run a few tests. But when we come back, here's what's gonna happen. The tests are gonna confirm what I heard, but when it confirms what I heard, there's gonna need to be a decision. Said, fine. They run the test. He comes back and he says, your daughter has aortic stenosis. And I said, okay, what can we do? He says, well, she'll need to have surgery. I said, okay, when can we schedule the surgery? He said, when she's a year old. I said, now, let me get this right. This is a major problem, and she needs surgery, and we have to? Now, this is 35 years ago. It's not today. They can do it today. But they said, her heart isn't large enough for us to do this surgery. She's got to make it to a year. And so my wife's sitting there right behind me, and she says to the doctor, how do we make it to a year? The doctor puts up his hands and says, I can't answer that question. All I can tell you is that we cannot do this surgery until she's a year old. Jenny goes into the mama stage and says, well, do I stop her from crying? Do I stop her from moving around? He looked and he said, she could be totally quiet and die. She could move around and die. She could be lying still and die. All I can tell you is that she's got to make it to a year. We go home. And now Jenny and I are dealing with the fact that a doctor's told us that our daughter can die any second. For the next year, we're going to walk by her room. Every time you couldn't hear her, we're thinking in our head, she's dead. Every time she cried loud, we're thinking, this could be too much. For a year, we're gonna go through the process of knowing that there's nothing that we can do. The pressure is gonna get so strong on me that I would get Casey up in the middle of the night. I would put her in her stroller, and we're in Texas. You know, you guys have 90-degree weather and you say, man, it's really, really hot. Well, it's 100 degrees outside in Texas, and I'm taking Casey and we're walking around around the block, and I'm praying to God, God, she's gotta make it to a year. She's gotta make it to a year, she's got to. And I look at Casey and I said, Casey, you've gotta fight, you've gotta fight, you've gotta fight. Don't give up, don't give up, you've gotta fight. And so as I'm praying that, I can tell you of all the prayers that I've ever prayed, that one of Casey fighting, God answered it. That girl will fight with you over everything. Dear Jesus. That girl will fight with you. But one day I got to do her wedding, and I said, Jesse, the fight's yours now. Thank you, Jesus. But for a year, if she's not crying, she died. She'd be laying in her bed peacefully like a baby, and you'd have to go up there and you'd put your hand on her just to feel that she was still breathing. So it finally gets to a year. surgery is going to be a long, in-depth surgery. Again, it's different than it is today. There are 5 doctors that are going to be in there during this surgery. And during this particular surgery, it's so specialized what they had to do back then that we're just sitting there. And I went to each one of the 5 doctors and I said, tell me what is the best that you can tell me the outcome of this would be. I went to the anesthesiologist. I went to the person who's going to do, the bypass pump. I went to the surgeon. I went to all of them. And here's what they told us. They said the best expectation that you have is that we complete this surgery, that she survives it. And then at 5, she'll need to have another surgery. At 12, she'll need to have another one. In her teens, she'll need to have another one. In her 20s, she'll need to have another one. And she'll live to be 30. So I went to all of them because Jenny and I formulated a prayer and we literally wrote down and said, literally, God, this is how long they said the surgery is going to take. This is how long they said she would need to be on pain meds. This is what they thought they could achieve with the pressure gradient between the inside of the valve versus the outside of the valve. We went through everything and we wrote that prayer down. And then at the bottom of it, we wrote Ephesians 3:20, that you are able to do exceedingly abundantly above. And said, God, this is the best that man can do, but it's not the best that you can do. We're asking. I could literally stand up here and bring Casey's medical records, and I can show you based on the drugs she was given, based on the time she was in recovery, based on everything, that she was the quickest child ever in that hospital to come out. Now, what I can tell you about Casey is this. She's over 30. She's now on the city council in Plano. She's never had another surgery. And every cardiologist has said that she won't. But that being said, a few years later, we wanted a boy in our family. I specifically wanted an athlete. Now, let's just be honest today. This is church. If you looked at this genetic pool here, does anything scream athlete? There's nothing about this body that speaks to athletics. So for me to get an athlete, I had to go outside the gene pool. So we have an opportunity to adopt Cody. We're there the day he's born at City of Faith. What better place to be born where everything's gonna be perfect than a hospital called City of Faith? But I've lived through Casey. Jenny's lived through Casey. And so when Cody's born, the first thing that I do is I go to the doctors and I said, is his heart all right? Doctor listens to his heart, says his heart's perfect. Get another doctor I said, listen to his heart. Perfect. I had 5 doctors listen to my son's heart. They all said it was perfect. We end up going back home to Plano. I'm at church. I'm literally sitting in my office doing my church stuff. And all of a sudden, Jenny calls me and I said, sweetheart, is everything all right? But it was his 6-week exam. And I could hear that she was crying and she says, Gerald, you got to get to the doctor's office. I said, what? Just give the kid the shot, whatever it is, just give him the shot. I mean, I know he may be upset, but give him the shot. She said, no, you got to get here. I walk in, the pediatrician looks and he says, Mr. Brooks, there's a problem with Cody's heart and you've got to take him to a pediatric cardiologist. Now, can I tell you something? I knew a good Jewish one then. So I go to the same Jewish pediatrician cardiologist. He takes that stethoscope and he listens to Cody's heart. And when he listens to Cody's heart, he puts the stethoscope down, turns and looks at me, and he says, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, I cannot medically calculate this for you. The odds of you having 2 kids with a major heart problem, I can't even give you medical odds on this, let alone that one of them's adopted. But he said, he's gonna need to have heart surgery. Now, I'm a pastor. I'm not cool like you guys are. I'm spitting mad at God. I've lived a year with the thoughts, your daughter's dead. I spent a whole year getting up with the pressure so great that you couldn't sleep at night. I spent a year walking through the trauma of feeling like every moment that I was gonna come home at lunch and Casey'd be dead. Now, I do this for a living. And I'm mad at God. I said, God, why in the world do I have to? I've already done my time. I know you guys are nicer to God than me. I said, I've already been there. I've already done my time. And then God speaks in my heart. He says, Gerald, can I ask you a question? He said, if there was gonna be a little boy born with a heart defect, what better home to put him in than in a home where someone already knows how to believe for a heart? Now, here's what I want to tell you. Jenny never felt that our faith was big enough. If I were basing our journey of faith on feeling like our faith was big enough, we wouldn't be people of faith. But you know what? I never felt like my faith was big enough, but I found out my God was great enough. And what I want to say to you is, if you've been spending all your time posing in the mirror, seeing your muscle of faith, back away from the mirror and start looking to your God. Because what I can tell you is God is big enough to get you through anything that you're in, and faith is the vehicle, but God is the source. Don't make faith the source and God the vehicle. So when Jesus said, hey, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, I get it. I get it when a doctor walks in and says, hey, you gotta make it a year. And there's nothing you can do. I know what that feels like. And so to that single mom, you don't feel like you got any help? I know what that feels like. To that alcoholic, I know what that feels like. To the person who's diagnosed with cancer, I know what that feels like. But I'm telling you, faith isn't about the greatness of your faith. Faith is about the greatness of your God. And if you will just turn to a great God, you'll find out there's nothing you're faced with that God will not, cannot, and does not get you through.
We have a passion at Faith Family Church to discover all that God has for us. We welcome and honor our guests so you can experience a church that is full of life and encounter a God that's real and loves you. Our worship experiences are designed for every age, helping you to live out a personal relationship with Jesus and develop an authentic faith in Him. We want to redefine church as you might know it, and we're reaching people around the world through our live stream. So we encourage you to join us live online every Sunday at 10 a.m. and Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Because Faith Family Church is for families, for singles, for couples, for the elderly, for young people, for the hurting, the lost, the hopeless. Faith Family Church is for people.